A cold wind was blowing that morning when I first saw them, two sisters standing on a wooden platform, as if waiting for judgment, not rescue. Their wrists were tied, their boots were dusty, and yet, the older one still held herself like she wouldn't let the world see her break. Folks in Spring Hollow said it was just a debt auction, nothing more. But the way the crowd looked at those girls like they were cattle, not human, told a different truth. I remember thinking how strange it was that the only man who stepped forward that day was someone the whole town whispered about. A man burdened with grief and rumors sharp enough to cut. And I remember wondering, why would a man like that fight for two girls he'd never met, or had he met them before? If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin. The sun over Spring Hollow burned straight down, white and merciless, flattening every sound but the rattle of dust along the main street. Heat shimmered above the packed earth. Even the horses tied outside the land office stood with lowered heads, as if ashamed to witness what was about to happen. A rough wooden platform sat in front of the porch boards, warped from years of weather and too many legal proceedings that looked an awful lot like something else. Clara Wynne felt the scorch of the planks through the soles of her boots. Her wrists ached where the rope rubbed raw skin, and though she tried to keep her chin high, sweat trickled down from her hairline and stung her eyes. Beside her, Lena trembled so hard, the rope between them twitched. She held the little blue ribbon at her wrist, like it might be the last piece of herself she could protect. Maybe it was. Their house had burned, their father had died, and now the two of them stood on a platform, like horses, ready for inspection. A nailed notice flapped in the hot breeze, Deb Labor Contract YNN Sisters to be sold to satisfy arrears. Men lounged in front of the general store across the street, hats tilted back, boots propped. A few soldiers from the cavalry post leaned on their rifles. Women from the chapel stood with parasols shading their faces, whispering behind fans. Everyone had come to watch the Wynne girls lose the last shred of their lives. Deputy Cole Lane stood near the platform, badge polished bright. He looked Clara over with the smooth expression he used on Sunday mornings when he spoke to widows. But his eyes slid down her arms, her figure a little too long. He turned to the auctioneer, as if to distance himself from the spectacle he had arranged. "Let's keep it orderly," Lane said, loud enough for all to hear. "Town's gotta follow the law." Clara felt bile rise in her throat. What he called law felt like something older and uglier. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "First lot, Clara Wynne, age 22. Schoolteacher, knows her letters, keeps accounts, cooks. Second lot, Lena Wynne, age 16. Seamstress, good with a needle, both able-bodied." "Barely," someone muttered, eyeing Lena's slight limp. Clara tightened her jaw. Her shame burned hotter than the sun, but she locked her knees and stood firm. Lena just kept breathing fast and shallow, clutching that faded ribbon. "Opening bid," the auctioneer called. A thick-shouldered railroad foreman raised his hand. "I'll take 'em both. They'll do fine at the Westcut camp. Need girls to keep the books and mend the men's clothes." His smirk said more than his words. Rail camps were places people disappeared into. Clara swallowed hard. No church, no neighbors, no freedom, no Lena left untouched. The bidding crept upward, $20, $30, $40. Every number felt like a nail sealing their fate. Clara searched the crowd for a kind face, someone who might see them as more than numbers. But even the good folks looked away. Looking meant caring, caring meant trouble. When the foreman raised it to 75, Clara felt Lena's weight tilt toward her, as if her sister's knees might give out. Clara wanted to whisper, "Hold on," but her throat was too dry for sound. 90, the foreman barked, clearly tired of the game. "I'll haul 'em out this afternoon." Going once, the auctioneer called. Clara closed her eyes. Then a voice cut through the heat like a cold wind. $150 for both. The murmurs rippled outward. Folks stepped aside on instinct, the way they do when storm clouds roll over the ridge. A man walked forward, dusty duster coat, hat pulled low, the sun painting a long shadow at his feet. He moved like a man who didn't care what the crowd thought but saw everything anyway. Elias Mercer. Clara knew the name. Everyone did. Broken Mesa Ranch. Widower. The man folks whispered about when the nights got long. The foreman snorted. 175. Elias didn't blink. 200. And I'll see the papers myself. Silence snapped tight as a rope. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing at Deputy Lane. Lane rolled a shoulder like he couldn't care less. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he figured Clara and Lena would end up broken no matter who took them. The foreman spat in the dirt. Hell with it. Not worth the trouble. Going once, the auctioneer said quickly. Going twice. His gavel slammed the post. Sold to Mr. Elias Mercer. Lena let out a tiny choking sound. Clara felt her lungs fill for the first time all morning. Elias stepped onto the platform, boots thudding solid and sure. He reached for the rope, binding their wrists. Name's Elias Mercer, he said quietly. Broken Mesa Ranch is 8 miles west. We'll leave once you're steady. Clara stared at him wary. He smelled of horse and cedar smoke. His eyes were gray, unreadable, shadowed beneath his hat brim. When the rope fell away from her skin, she flinched without meaning to. He cut Lena's bonds next. His hands were calloused, careful, like he'd learned gentleness the hard way. He offered a canteen to Lena. She hesitated, then took it with both hands, drinking in small, desperate sips. When he handed it to Clara, she accepted but didn't drink. "What do you want from us?" she asked, voice hoarse. Elias looked at her a long moment. Not like a buyer, not like a man weighing profit, more like someone taking a measure of himself and not liking the answer. "You were sold like stock," he said. "That doesn't sit right with me." He stepped back, giving them space. "You'll work, yes. Everyone at Broken Mesa works. But you won't be owned." His voice dropped to something quieter, deeper. "I'll give you both a home. What you do with it, that's up to you." The words fell into Clara like water on parched ground. Lena's fingers found the blue ribbon again, gripping it gently as if for the first time she believed there might still be something left to hold on to. But the weight of the crowd's stares, Lane's thin smile, the foreman's sneer, they pressed in all the same. Spring Hollow wasn't done with them, not yet, maybe not ever. And Clara, feeling the bruised place where her ropes had been, wondered whether a stranger's promise could outmatch a whole town's judgment. The wind shifted. Dust curled around their feet, and Elias Mercer turned toward the waiting road. Clara wasn't sure whether to follow him or fear what waited beyond the mesa. The wagon rattled hard as it rolled out of Spring Hollow, iron rims clattering over ruts carved deep by years of freight and cavalry supply trains. Dust rose behind them in a long, fading trail, swallowing the town whole, until its rooftops shrank into nothing but a shimmer in the heat. Clara didn't look back. She didn't trust herself to. Lena leaned against her shoulder, breathing in soft, shaky rhythm, exhaustion finally claiming her after the long morning. Clara held her close fingers, brushing the ribbon at Lena's wrist. That scrap of blue cloth had survived fire, debt collectors, and shame. Clara wondered if it would survive whatever came next. Elias Mercer kept his eyes on the road ahead. The reins rested loose and sure in his hands, as if the horses trusted him more than any person did. The late afternoon sun caught the edges of his duster, turning the trail dust into a faint halo around him. He didn't talk. He didn't explain himself. And somehow that worried Clara more than if he'd tried to sweet-talk them with promises. The only sounds were hooves striking the hard-packed earth and the creak of the wagon frame. Every so often, a grasshopper launched itself from the dry sage, tapping the sideboard like a tiny warning. Clara kept her eyes on Elias's shoulders, square beneath his coat. She tried to read something in the set of his jaw, but he held his thoughts like a man used to losing too much. They passed the blacksmith's forge on the town's edge. The smith, a grizzled man named Haskins, paused mid-swing, sweat dripping down his forearms. He gave Elias a nod that carried respect and something like pity. Clara didn't like the way that looked. A mile farther, the trail dipped near an old dry creek bed. The stones there were bleached white, shaped by water the prairie hadn't seen in years. The windmill by the abandoned well clacked lazily, its blades turning like tired prayer wheels. "Can you read well?" Elias asked, suddenly his voice rough but calm. Clara blinked. "Yes, figures too. I kept accounts for our father's store." He gave a small nod as if ticking a box in his mind. Then he angled a glance toward Lena, still resting against Clara's shoulder. "And she sews?" "Yes," Clara said quietly. "She's gifted with detail." Another nod. Not prying, not warm, just measuring. She wasn't sure if that was better or worse. They rode past a small whitewashed chapel standing alone against the horizon, its bell still, its door closed tight. Clara's breath caught. The sight tugged something raw inside her. Smoke. The crackle of burning wood. Her father shouting for them to escape while embers swallowed their home. Clara clenched her jaw and forced the memory back where it belonged, in the dark corner she never opened unless she had to. "You all right?" Elias asked without turning. "Fine," she lied. The road rose, winding between low mesas, the color of rusted iron. Far off, barely visible, the flag at the cavalry fort flapped in the rising wind. It looked like a toy at that distance, a reminder of law, order, or the appearance of both. Clara studied Elias again. He didn't belong to the fort. He didn't belong to Spring Hollow. Men who carried stories on their backs rarely did. After a long stretch of silence, he spoke again. "Your father, Henry Wynne, he used to bring lumber through the canyon road. Sold me 2 loads the winter before." He stopped. Clara's heart thudded. Before, what? He didn't answer. But the way he said her father's name, too natural, too familiar, made something uneasy coil low in her stomach. Evening settled slow over the land, the sky turning brass and purple. When they finally crested the last ridge, Clara saw Broken Mesa Ranch spread out below them, tucked against the shadow of a tall mesa that split the sunset like a knife. The ranch house was long and low, built of weathered timber with a porch that wrapped 2 sides. A large barn stood behind it, doors open, lantern lights spilling across the yard. Fenced corrals held rangy horses that lifted their heads at the sound of the wagon. A windmill turned steady in the breeze, its steady ticking like a heartbeat. It wasn't grand, it wasn't pretty, but it looked lived in, solid, rooted, real. Lena stirred. "We're here," she murmured. Clara brushed a strand of hair from her sister's cheek. "Looks like it." Elias brought the wagon to a stop in front of the porch. Before Clara could help, Lena down hoofbeats sounded from the side trail. A rider came fast, Doc Harlan, the physician who made his rounds from ranch to ranch. His horse lathered at the mouth, his brows knitted with concern. "Even in Elias," the doctor said, sliding off the saddle. "Got word one of your hands took a spill in the south pasture. Figured I'd better check on him." "He's inside," Elias replied. "Caught his leg under a spooked gelding. Might be sprained." Clara waited for Elias to gesture them inside, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped toward the doctor, voice dropping low. Lena was still climbing down. Clara stayed still, half hidden by the wagon, not meaning to eavesdrop, only unable to stop hearing. Doc Harlan lowered his voice. "You sure about this, Elias? 2 more souls on your conscience." Clara's breath froze. Elias exhaled like a man carrying too much. "Couldn't look their father in the eyes on Judgment Day if I'd walked away again." Again. The word hit Clara harder than the desert heat ever had. Doc shook his head. "You can't fix everything that happened back then." "Maybe not," Elias said quietly. "But I'm damn well trying." Clara's fingers tightened on the wagon rail. The world narrowed until it was nothing but the doctor's fading footsteps, Elias's silhouette in the dusk, and one pounding question. What did he mean by "again"? And how did he know their father well enough to speak of judgment and debt like that? The wind rustled through the corral fence, carrying the groat, smell of hay and horses across the yard. Lena slid her hand into Clara's. Her sister's eyes were wide, innocent, hopeful. Clara couldn't match that hope. Not now, not after those words. Elias Mercer wasn't just kind. He wasn't just a stranger stepping in. He knew something tied to their father, to their past, and to a guilt he carried like a second skin. As twilight deepened around Broken Mesa Ranch, Clara felt the shape of a truth she didn't yet understand, and it terrified her more than the auction ever had. The sun had dipped below the jagged line of Broken Mesa by the time Elias led them into the main house. Shadows stretched long across the porch, and the air carried that cool edge the desert always saved for nightfall. Clara stepped through the doorway first, Lena close at her side, both bracing for something they couldn't name. The entry smelled faintly of pine soap and old wood, Not perfume, not whiskey, a lived-in warmth that surprised her. "This way," Elias said, his boots soft on the plank floor. He stopped at a small door off the main hall and pushed it open. Inside was a narrow room, plain as a prayer bench, 2 modest beds against opposite walls, each topped with a hand-sewn quilt of faded calicos. A cracked blue basin sat on a washstand. A single window looked out toward the looming mesa, its silhouette black against the violet sky. "It's all I have for now," he said. "More space, once we clear out the old tack room." Lena brushed her fingers along one of the quilts, like it was something precious. Clara nodded, unable to find polite words. The room wasn't beautiful, but it was clean, safe-looking, and that alone felt strange enough to hurt. Elias rested a hand briefly on the door frame. "Some things to know." Clara stiffened. "You'll work mornings on house tasks," he said evenly. "Cook if you'd like, or sew. I'll show you the storeroom tomorrow." He rubbed the back of his neck as if weighing how much to say. "Doors don't lock here," he added. "Never have. But no man enters your room. Not me, not Rufus, not any hand that ever comes by. That's the rule." Clara felt her lungs expand, slow and cautious. "You're free to leave the ranch," he went on, "if you earn enough to pay out what I spent. I'll keep the books clear as spring water." His voice wasn't harsh, just steady, like someone laying out fence lines so no one wandered into trouble. Lena glanced at Clara, eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. "Wash up if you want," Elias said. "Supper's simple tonight." He left them to their silence. The kitchen smelled of beans simmering with ham bone, and the lamplight softened the edges of everything. The walls, the table, even the 2 rough men sitting at it. Rufus, the old ranch hand, had snow-gray whiskers and shoulders like a barn beam. He nodded at the sisters. "Evenin', ma'ams," he said. His voice creaked like a barn door but carried no threat. They ate at the wooden table, Elias at the head, Rufus at the side, the sisters across from one another. Conversation stayed near the surface, the weather turning fences needing mending before the fall winds, a mare ready to foal early. Nothing that touched the past, nothing that hinted at the auction. Lena didn't talk, just spooned beans carefully, as if quiet might keep her invisible. The blue ribbon on her wrist slipped into view as she reached for cornbread. Elias's gaze flickered to it, just a heartbeat, but Clara saw the look. Not curiosity. Something heavier. Recognition maybe. Or sorrow. He didn't ask about it. Didn't even look again. But the hurt in his eyes lingered with Clara long after the meal ended. When Rufus retired to his bunkhouse, and Elias banked the stove fire for the night, Clara guided Lena back to their room. The hallway felt too still, as if the house were holding its breath for them. "Do you think he's honest?" Lena whispered, while they washed their faces in the basin. Clara wrung out her cloth. "I don't know, but he seems kind," Clara cut in softly. "Kindness can be a mask, or a debt, or a mistake someone's trying to fix." Lena looked small in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders. "I just want to sleep without thinking the door might open." Clara's throat tightened. "I know." They lay in their separate beds. The quilts were thin but warm. The wind tapped softly at the window, rattling dust across the sill. For the first time in weeks, the night carried no shouts, no flames, no boots stomping across the floorboards. Still, Clara couldn't sleep. She listened to the soft rasp of Lena's breathing, the faint ticking of the windmill outside the settling of the ranch house as the cold crept in. The quiet made room for memories. Fire eats a house fast. It climbs curtains before a person knows to run. She had seen it leap like a living thing across their pantry shelves. She had smelled their father's coat burning. Clara pressed her hands flat against the quilt, trying to ground herself, but the memory rolled over her anyway. Smoke choking her lungs, her father's voice through the red haze. "Get your sister out, Clara, go." A shadow at the window, reaching in through the flames, broad shoulders, a hat brim, a hand she couldn't quite grasp before the smoke swallowed everything. Clara jolted upright with a muffled cry. Her breath came too fast, too sharp. She pressed her palms against her eyes, forcing the world into darkness again. A soft knock came at the door. Miss Wynne, Elias's voice. Low. Not pushing. "Everything all right?" She didn't answer. Another pause. Longer this time. "You're safe here," he said quietly, still outside the closed door. "Fire can't get you tonight." Clara's breath hitched. Got stone built up all along this side of the house, he added. Thick enough to hold off anything but the end of days. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just knowing. He spoke again, softer than before. Sleep if you can. Wind'll keep watch. His footsteps faded down the hallway. Clara lay back slowly, staring at the faint glow under the door. Her hands trembled, but her breathing eased by degrees. He shouldn't have known what to say. Shouldn't have known the shape of nightmares that didn't belong to him. Yet he had spoken like a man who'd once stood in the same glow of burning walls. Lena shifted in her sleep, murmuring something too soft to catch. Clara whispered, "It's all right," though she wasn't sure if she said it for her sister or herself. Outside, the ranch settled deeper into the dark. Horses shifted in their corrals. The windmill creaked. The mesa brooded over everything like an ancient witness. And Clara lay awake, wondering what secrets Elias Mercer carried and how much of her past he already understood. Dawn crept slow across broken mesa, painting the sky a bruised pink. The air carried the smell of strong coffee and sizzling salt pork drifting through the open doorway of the kitchen. Clara stood at the stove, turning biscuits, the hem of her skirt brushing the warm floorboards. Lena hummed softly as she dried dishes, her limp less noticeable in the early stillness. Rufus came in, wiping frost from his beard. "Mercer wants you to ride with me to town," he said to Clara. "Supplies for the week. Won't take long." Clara nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll get my shawl." Elias had already saddled the wagon. He stood by the hitching post, checking the straps with quiet focus. When Clara approached, he stepped back to give her room, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You'll be with Rufus," he said. "Town's only 8 miles. Should be back before the noon whistle." "Yes, sir," Clara replied. He paused at her tone, too formal, too distant. But he didn't correct her, just gave a small nod and walked back toward the barn. The ride into Spring Hollow was easier than Clara expected. The morning sun cast long shadows over the sagebrush, and the air was cool enough to keep dust low. Rufus hummed an old trail song as the wagon rattled along. But once the first rooftops appeared, Clara felt her chest tighten. Spring Hollow looked different now than the day of the auction, not because the buildings had changed, but because she knew they were looking at her differently. Not just with curiosity, with judgment. The wagon wheels hadn't even slowed before whispers rose like flies. "That's them, the Wynn girls. Sold off yesterday. Living out at Mercer's place now." Clara kept her eyes straight ahead, but every whispered word pricked at her skin. Near the chapel, 3 women stood under parasols, neat dresses brushing their ankles. Their voices drifted across the dirt road, loud enough to carry, soft enough to pretend innocence. "That older one looks too proud for her own good. Pride or not, she's still contract labor. And with Mercer," a snort, "you know what they say about him." Clara clenched her jaw. She wanted to pull Lena close, though her sister wasn't even there. She wanted to shout that they weren't criminals or strays or something to point at. But she kept her head down the way her father taught her. When you've lost everything, the last thing you can afford to lose is your dignity. Rufus nudged her gently. "Ignore 'em. Town folks need something to talk over biscuits." Clara wished she could. At the general store, the bell chimed overhead as they stepped inside. The shelves smelled of flour, dust, and kerosene. Behind the counter stood Marla Briggs, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, silver threads woven into her dark hair. She looked at Clara a beat too long before offering a small smile. "Mornin', honey." "Good morning, Mrs. Briggs." Marla filled the order: flour, beans, salt, coffee grounds, a tin of axle grease. When Clara paid with the coins Elias had given her, Marla slipped an extra scoop of sugar into the sack. "Think you mismeasured," Clara said quietly. "No," Marla replied. "I didn't." Then softer, "You girls eat enough to keep your strength. That ranch can be a lonely place." Clara wasn't sure whether she meant it kindly or as a warning. Outside, the street felt warmer, the sun harsher. And there, leaning against the post outside the saloon, was Deputy Lane, hat tipped low, a glass lazily dangling from his fingers. "Well now," he drawled as they passed. "Clara Wynn. How's ranch life, Lena, settling in?" "All right." Clara kept walking, but Lane pushed off the post and followed a step. "You let me know if Mercer gives you any trouble," he said, voice softening like honey left in the sun. Some folks out past the mesa forget the law still reaches that far. Clara turned just enough to meet his eyes. They were cold, greedy, like he enjoyed reminding her he held power over her life. "I appreciate the concern," she said, though the words tasted of iron. Lane smiled. "Just looking out for you." Rufus cleared his throat. Not loud but firm. Lane stepped back, still smiling like he'd won anyway. The blacksmith's forge lay at the far end of town, smoke drifting up in lazy spirals. Haskins worked with his shirt sleeves, rolled hammer clanging against hot metal. Clara waited outside, while Rufus spoke with him about shoes for the mare and a cracked hinge. Two cowboys lounged nearby, boots up on a rail. They talked as if she wasn't there. "Mercer's taken in girls now," one said. "Lord help him." "You hear what happened to his wife," the other muttered. "Face down in the creek and the doc calls it an accident." "Sure." The first man spit in the dust. "Man like that, I'd watch my back if I was those girls." Clara felt heat rush to her face, not from the forge, but the shame of standing within arm's reach, while men carved up her life and her rescuer, as if neither mattered. She turned away so they wouldn't see her eyes burn. On the way back through town, Clara stopped at the general store again, under the pretense of checking the sack. But really she sought the one person who might tell her the truth. Marla was sweeping the porch when Clara approached. "Mrs. Briggs," Clara said softly. Marla paused mid-sweep. "Yes, honey," Clara swallowed. "What happened to Elias Mercer's wife?" The broom bristles stilled. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the porch boards as Marla shifted her weight. "Bodies tell one story," she finally said. "Rumors tell another." She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "You'll have to decide which you believe, honey. Just mind your own safety until you know." Clara's heart thudded painfully. Elias Mercer, rescuer or danger, protector or predator? As Rufus called her back to the wagon, Clara walked stiffly into the bright morning, feeling the whole of Spring Hollow pressing down on her with its whispers, its warnings, and its half-truths. And somewhere deep inside, suspicion began to coil, slow and cold, as she tried to reconcile the man who cut her ropes with the man the town insisted he was. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old slate, the kind that made seasoned ranch hands glance upward and mutter. The wind stiffened across the mesa, flattening the grass and sending dust skittering along the fence lines. Clara stood on the porch, shaking crumbs from a kitchen towel, when she felt the first drop of cold rain strike her cheek. Storms came fast, out here, fast and mean. Rufus jogged across the yard, hat clamped to his head, shouting toward the barn. "Wind's kickin'. Secure the north gate before the geldings tear through." Clara turned, heart already pulling tight. "Where's Lena?" She spotted her sister near the barn, limping toward a loose stall door that banged open and shut with each gust. Lena braced her weight on her good leg and reached for the latch. 1 second she stood steady. The next, a skittish gelding spooked by the thunder, starting to roll across the mesa, reared and lunged sideways. Lena, Clara's scream tore out before she could think. The gelding's flank slammed into the stall door. The force knocked Lena off her feet. She hit the ground hard on her side, the breath knocked clear out of her. Dirt and rain splattered her dress as the wind tried to drag the door from its hinges. Clara ran, skirts whipping around her legs, rain coming harder now, fat cold drops that stung like pellets. By the time she reached Lena, water streamed down her face and hair, mixing with the panic rising in her chest. "Lena, look at me please, can you move?" Lena's eyes fluttered open, dazed. I think," but she couldn't finish. Pain twisted her features. Clara grabbed her sister's hand, both of them shaking. "Somebody help, please." Thunder cracked overhead so close it rattled Clara's bones. The wind slammed the stall door again, making the gelding rear. Then through the sheet of rain a figure emerged at a full run. Elias. He moved with the kind of speed men didn't waste unless someone's life hung by a thread. Coat-soaked hat, dripping boots, slipping in the mud, he reached them in 3 strides. "Get back," he ordered gently but firmly as he knelt beside Lena. Clara scrambled out of the way but didn't let go of Lena's hand. Elias slid his arms beneath the girl with a steadiness that felt almost unreal in the chaos of the storm. Lena weighed nothing in his hold. He lifted her, as if she were made of cotton, and breathed only fear. "Hang on, little one," he murmured. He carried her across the yard against the wind. His boots sank deep into the mud water streaming down his neck. Clara stumbled after him, soaked to the bone. Inside the kitchen, warmth hit them like a blessing. Elias laid Lena gently on a folded blanket on the floor, his breath steady despite the sprint. Clara grabbed towels. "Rufus, boil water." Clara obeyed without thinking, her hands trembling as she tossed towels beside him. The stove roared to life as Rufus threw kindling in. Elias knelt, wet coat dripping onto the floorboards, hair plastered to his forehead. Yet his hands, those rough, weathered hands, moved with a tenderness Clara had never expected. "Lena, can you hear me?" His voice was low, calming. "I'm gonna check your ribs first." Lena whimpered as he pressed lightly along her side. "No break," he murmured. "Bruised though. Might hurt for a few days." He shifted to examine her leg. Clara watched closely, her own breath caught in her throat. "Does this hurt?" he asked, gently moving the limb. Lena hissed, but nodded. "Not broken," he said, "but twisted bad. Needs a poultice." Doc Harlan left some tincture. Clara fetched the bottle with the red twine. She found it quickly, hands still shaking. Elias mixed the tincture with mashed comfrey in a small bowl, then applied it with slow, careful pressure. Lena's breathing eased. "You're all right," he murmured to her. "Pain's loud now, but it'll quiet soon." Clara watched him, the way he supported Lena's knee, the way he wiped water from her forehead without drawing attention to it. This wasn't the cold precision of a man who didn't care. This was someone who had tended to injury before, someone who'd had to. When Lena finally drifted into a restless sleep on the blanket, Clara tucked the quilt around her. Rufus slipped back outside to check on the horses. The storm hammered the roof now, but inside the house, the air felt strangely still, held together by a thread she couldn't yet name. Clara rose, wiping her hands on her damp skirt. She should have stayed near Lena. But something in the hall pulled her attention. Maybe the quiet, maybe curiosity, maybe the exhaustion of feeling afraid of everything, except the man she'd been told to fear most. A door halfway down the hallway stood slightly open. She hesitated, then stepped toward it. The room beyond was dim dust floating in the weak light from a small window. On the dresser lay a thin layer of forgotten beginnings, hair ribbons, a tiny carved horse, a chipped cup with faded flowers painted on the rim. A child's quilt sat folded at the foot of a narrow bed, and at the side 2 small boots worn at the toes placed neatly together. Clara's heart clenched. The room wasn't empty, it was paused, as if someone had stepped out expecting to return. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Elias stood in the doorway, his shoulders still damp, his eyes darker than the storm outside. He didn't look angry, just tired, bone-tired. "Her name was Josie," he said quietly. "She liked blue ribbons too." Clara's breath caught. Her gaze drifted from the boots to the quilt, then back to Elias's face. He closed the door gently, like he was tucking a wound back where it lived. "Storm's easing," he murmured. "I'll sit with Lena a while. You should dry off." But Clara couldn't move, because for the first time since Spring Hollow she wasn't afraid of Elias Mercer. Not entirely. Behind the rumors, beneath the silence, she'd glimpsed something else, an ache, deep and unspoken, as familiar as the one she carried. Grief. Not the coldness of a killer, just grief. And Clara stood there in the dim hallway, the storm fading, realizing she had no idea what to do with that. Lena healed slowly over the next week though. The bruising along her ribs still bloomed purple and yellow under her dress. The limp she'd always carried grew more pronounced after the fall, but she refused to stay in bed. She used the cane Elias carved from a piece of mesquite, smooth, sanded, sturdy shape to fit her hand. He'd cut it without being asked, handed it to her with a quiet, "See if this helps." Lena had held it like a gift, tracing the grain with shy fingers. Clara watched the exchange from the doorway, feeling something stir low in her chest. Gratitude, perhaps, or confusion, or both. In the evenings after supper and after Rufus drifted off to the bunkhouse, Clara helped Elias with the ranch paperwork. It started because he'd mentioned needing to update the supply orders, and Clara, eager for something useful to do, offered her help. They worked at the kitchen table lamplight, pooling across ledgers filled with neat slanted handwriting. Elias kept records like a man who'd learned the cost of losing track, every calf born, every rail of fencing bought or repaired, every dollar sent to town for grain. Clara handled the sums while he sorted the receipts. She could feel him watching the way her pencil moved, measuring, maybe impressed, maybe simply surprised that someone like her knew the rhythm of numbers. But that night, as she flipped through a stack of old lien papers, something stopped her cold. A note stamped with her family's name, WYNN, homestead, loan restructure pending. Her breath hitched. She glanced at Elias. He wasn't paying attention. He was marking a feed order, head bent. Clara turned the page. A second slip of paper. This one stamped in dark, decisive ink, foreclosed. Signed, Deputy Cole Lane, dated 3 weeks before the fire. Her stomach tightened. Why would Lane foreclose on their house before it burned? Why had her father never said a word? And why had the sheriff's men told her afterward that the fire was a tragic accident, nothing suspicious to see? Clara closed the ledger slowly, careful not to draw attention. "Everything add up?" Elias asked, without looking up. "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "It all adds up." But the truth was unraveling in her hands. 2 days later, Clara rode with Rufus into town to pick up medicine for Lena. The sky was clear, the wind mild, but Clara felt unsettled, as if something shifted beneath the surface of the world without her permission. Instead of turning left toward the general store, Rufus guided the wagon toward the northern edge of Spring Hollow. "Need to swing by the marshal's office," he said. "Got papers to drop." The small army outpost sat beyond a line of cottonwoods, its flag barely stirring in the breeze. A few cavalry horses tied to the hitching rail stamped and snorted. Clara kept her eyes low, trying not to draw attention. Then she saw it. Near the rail stood Deputy Lane's wagon, recognizable by the polished brass rein buckles and the worn mark on its side where his boot always struck when he climbed in. But what froze Clara's breath was the long, charred plank of wood lying across the back, warped, blackened along one edge, and marked with a knot pattern she knew by heart. Her father used to laugh about that knot, a circle inside a circle shaped like an eye. "Old trees winking at us," he'd say while repairing the corral fence. "Means she's older than sin and twice as stubborn." Clara's hand lifted without thinking, fingers trembling. It was the same wood, from their corral, from home, from the night everything burned. Why would a piece of their fence be here on Lane's wagon? Why keep it at all? Heat prickled along her spine despite the cool air. She stepped closer, squinting at the grain. Yes, the pattern was unmistakable. The blackening too, like it had burned in the same fire that swallowed her house. A voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Clara." She startled so violently she nearly tripped. Doc Harlan stood beside her, horse hands tucked into his coat pockets. His gaze followed hers to the charred board. "You've been staring at that plank a long minute," he said quietly. It looks like her throat closed. She couldn't finish the sentence. Harlan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Boards like that don't just wander, Clara." She swallowed hard. "Doc, does he have reason to?" She couldn't force out the words, "hurt my family." Harlan studied her carefully. A man leaves tracks even when he thinks he's walking on water. He glanced toward the outpost door, where Lane laughed with one of the cavalrymen. "Cole Lane smiles with his mouth," the doctor murmured, "but not with his eyes." Clara gripped the side of the wagon for balance. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "That you'd best be careful," Harlan said. "Curiosity can save a soul, or burn it down. Just depends whose truth you're digging into." A chill slid through Clara, because, until this moment, she'd been trying to decide whether Elias Mercer was a danger or a broken-hearted man. But now the suspicion shifted. Maybe the man everyone warned her about, the quiet rancher with grief in his eyes, wasn't the one to fear. Maybe the danger was the lawman who smiled too easily. The man who stood at the auction pretending to help. The man whose signature sat on the foreclosure that came before the fire. Everything inside Clara tightened like a knot pulled too quickly. "Clara," Rufus called from the wagon. "We're heading back." She forced her feet to move, forced her breath to steady, forced her eyes away from the man she now watched with new sharpened fear. When she climbed into the wagon beside Rufus, the world looked different, emptier. darker, around the edges. The road home stretched long ahead of them, and for the first time Clara prayed the ranch house truly was as solid and as safe as Elias had promised, because she suddenly wasn't sure Lane would let them stay safe for long. The night lay soft over Broken Mesa, the kind of quiet that seemed to stretch for miles, settling into every hollow of the land. Above them stars shimmered like frost, scattered across black velvet, and somewhere off in the dark a pair of coyotes answered each other, brief cries that rose and fell, like threads pulled tight then cut loose. Clara sat beside the small fire pit just beyond the kitchen porch, rubbing her hands together to keep warm. The flames crackled, sending sparks up into the cool evening air. Lena had turned in early, worn out from a day of trying to walk more than she should. Rufus was in the bunkhouse, humming half-remembered trail songs. Only Elias lingered outside his hat, set beside his boots, his shoulders bent forward as if trying to fold himself into the glow. Clara's heart thudded against her ribs. She hadn't meant to stay out here with him. But after days of half-truths and questions twisting around her mind, she couldn't keep quiet any longer. Her voice came out low, almost swallowed by the fire. "Elias, what really happened to your wife?" He didn't move at first, didn't startle, didn't flinch, just stared into the flames as though the answer were buried somewhere deep in the embers. A long silence stretched between them. Clara regretted the question the moment it left her mouth, but she didn't withdraw it. Not now, not after everything she'd learned, everything she suspected. She needed the truth from him, and not from rumors swirling in town like dust devils. At last, Elias drew in a slow breath. "She was named Maggie," he said quietly, "short for Magnolia, though she hated the fuss of that name." His voice was rougher than usual, not sharp, just worn. "She was bright," he continued, "full of laughter when we first married, full of dreams. She wanted a garden full of roses and a piano in the parlor." His eyes softened. "And she wanted a big family. Said a house wasn't a home till it echoed with children." Clara didn't interrupt. But after Josie was born, Elias's jaw tightened. After the fever, something changed. Maggie would disappear inside herself for days at a time. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't bear sunlight. Some mornings, she didn't recognize her own hands. He swallowed hard, as if the words scraped on the way out. The doctor called it melancholia, said it might pass, said she needed rest, prayers, patience. He let out a short, humorless breath. "We tried all that." And some days she was herself again, smiling, humming, brushing Josie's hair into little braids. But other days, Clara heard the tremor beneath his steadiness. She leaned forward, barely breathing. "One winter night," Elias said, voice dropping, "while I was fixing a broken shutter, Maggie must have slipped out. There was a note on the kitchen table. I didn't see it till morning." "What did it say?" Clara whispered. "That she was tired. That she couldn't hold the weight anymore. That she loved us both." The fire popped sharply, but the sound felt muted against the heaviness in his chest. "I tracked her through the storm. Took me 4 hours to find her prints, another 3 to follow him. Snow was up past my knees, wind cutting so hard it felt like knives." His voice tightened. "By the time I reached the creek north of here, she was already gone." He closed his eyes as if bracing for the memory's blow. She'd lain down near the rocks, curled up like she was going to sleep. If I'd checked the note sooner, if I'd heard the door, if I'd woken just once during the night, Elias. Clara's voice broke. "It wasn't your fault." He didn't seem to hear her. When word spread, he said folks started talking. Said the bruises she carried, bruises she gave herself in her dark spells, meant I'd laid hands on her. Said no woman dies that way without a push. His jaw twitched. "The law never questioned me. The preacher stood by me. But people believe what fills their emptiness quickest, and rumor's a quick fill." Clara felt a slow ache blossom beneath her ribs. Every rumor she'd heard now tasted like poison. Elias' continued voice, scarcely above a whisper. "I didn't fight them. Was too ashamed of what I'd failed to do." Silence settled again, deeper, this time heavy enough to bow the air between them. Clara inhaled shakily. She hadn't expected this. She'd been bracing for violence, for a confession dipped in danger. Not grief, not devotion, not the raw wound of a man who'd lost both wife and hope in one winter storm. She should have stopped there, should have let the night rest. But another truth pressed up inside her, refusing to stay buried. "What about the night of our fire?" she asked gently. Elias's head jerked slightly, not in surprise but in resignation, as though he'd known this question was coming too. He didn't look at her. Instead, he stared past the flames, into the dark mesas, shadowing the ranch. "I was riding back from a supply run," he said. "Saw the sky glowing orange. At first thought lightning had struck a barn somewhere. But when I got closer," he shook his head. "It was your place, roof already caving." Clara's breath knotted. "You were there," she whispered. "I heard your father shouting through the smoke," Elias said, "yelling your names. He tried to reach you himself, but a beam fell, blocked him in." Elias swallowed. "I smashed through the back window, pulled you both out. You were half conscious." His voice roughened. "You were calling for each other." Clara's eyes stung. "You saved us," she said. Elias shook his head slowly. "I should have stayed afterward, should have told the sheriff what I saw, should have watched over you two until morning." His voice cracked. "But seeing the flames, hearing the way your father fought to reach you, it brought back Maggie." He looked down at his hands as if they were burned. "I panicked." Clara stared at him, the fire painting gold across the weary lines of his face. This man, this quiet, guarded, deeply damaged man, had risked his life twice for them, had carried her and Lena out of hell, had lived with the guilt ever since, and that meant one thing. He hadn't bought them by chance. He'd been carrying the weight of that night every day. "Elias," she whispered, the words trembling out of her, "you didn't walk away at the auction. You tried to make it right." He finally looked at her directly, openly, painfully. "I just wanted you safe," he said. "Safe in a way I couldn't make Maggie. Safe in a way your father begged for with his last breath." The confession broke something open between them, something quiet and enormous. Clara's pulse echoed in her ears. And in that moment, beneath the vast stretch of stars, she realized the danger wasn't Elias. It was the truth, still hiding in the ashes. The truth someone else didn't want her to find. The next week arrived with a dry wind rolling off the mesas, hot, restless, carrying dust that clung to the tongue and made the air feel tight. Clara was sweeping the porch when she heard the first sound of it, horses. Not the steady rhythm of ranch hands, not the clatter of supply carts. This was sharper, purposeful, too many hooves for a neighborly visit. 3 riders crested the low-rise beyond the windmill. Deputy Cole Lane rode in front. Behind him trailed 2 soldiers from Fort Ridley, blue coats, bright beneath the harsh sun, rifles slung across their saddles. Clara's fingers tightened around the broom handle. Lena, still moving slow on her injured leg, peeked out from the kitchen doorway. Her hand found Clara's sleeve, gripping it with the silent fear she didn't have words for. Lane dismounted with the lazy confidence of a man who believed the land and every soul on it belonged beneath his boot heel. "Well now," he said, brushing dust from his coat, "I thought I'd pay a courtesy visit. Just making sure things are lawful out here at Broken Mesa." His smile stretched, but the warmth stopped halfway across his face. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't reach for a gun, didn't stiffen. But Clara saw the subtle shift in his stance, the kind of stillness that came before storms. "State your business," Elias said. Lane lifted a fold of papers from his saddlebag and waved it like a preacher waving scripture. "Debt labor inspections," he said cheerfully. "Territorial policy. Got to make sure these girls are being treated proper. After all." He flicked a glance at Clara and Lena. "They're still under contract." Clara forced herself to speak, though her throat felt dry. "Our contract is with Mr. Mercer now." Lane's eyes slid to her like a cold knife. "On paper, yes, Miss Wynne, but that paper sits on my desk, which means it sits under my authority. And the law gives me the right to determine whether your situation is suitable." One of the soldiers shifted as if uncomfortable. The other kept his expression blank as someone trained not to see what he didn't want to testify about. Lane wasn't done. He strolled right up to Lena, tilting his head like she was a curiosity in a traveling show. "Hurt your leg, did you?" he asked, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Shame. A worker ought to stay sound." Hard for the army to get its money's worth otherwise. Lena shrank back. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. That injury happened here, not at your hand. Lane smiled, slow and smug. Oh honey, I don't need to cause the hurt myself. I just need to say you're being mistreated. And then I can haul you both out of here, shackled if need be, and ship you west to cut wood for the fort. He tapped the brim of his hat. That's the law. Elias took one step forward, just one. And suddenly, Lane wasn't smiling anymore. Cole, Elias said, voice calm enough to unsettle everyone in the yard, you're on private land. State your intentions clear. Lane leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so the soldiers wouldn't hear, not clearly anyway. I hear the whispers again, he murmured, about Maggie. People wondering if her death ought to be looked at more closely. Interesting timing, don't you think? It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Clara felt something cold slide down her spine. Elias didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't give Lane 1 inch. Instead he spoke so every man on that ranch could hear him. You want to bring up Maggie's name, then take it to the judge at Fort Ridley, in the open, with witnesses. Not in back rooms, not through gossip. Lane froze. Elias continued, voice steady and iron strong. I'm done watching you twist the law to suit your pockets. You want these girls removed. You drag that request in front of a judge, not onto their doorstep. The soldiers exchanged looks. Uneasy looks. Looks that said, maybe the deputy isn't the honest man he claims to be. Lane stepped back a half-inch enough to reveal he hadn't expected this. You're making a mistake, Mercer, he said, voice tight. Maybe, Elias replied. But it'll be my mistake, not one you force on them. A long, tense moment stretched between them, dust swirling, horses pawing the windmill, ticking like a nervous heartbeat. Finally Lane yanked his reins, swung into the saddle and snarled, this isn't over. He kicked his horse hard, riding out with the soldiers trailing behind, dust rising around them until they vanished into the shimmering heat. When the sound of hooves faded, Lena sagged against the railing, trembling. Clara set a hand on her back but couldn't look away from the empty horizon, because Lane's parting words weren't random. They were aimed at Elias, at her, at the truth she was only beginning to uncover, and Clara felt it pressing down on the ranch like storm clouds gathering over dry land. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The night came down harsh and restless, the way desert nights sometimes do, hot winds scraping across the mesa, lightning flickering at the far edge of the world, but no rain to quiet the dust. Broken Mesa Ranch lay mostly asleep. Only the windmill creaked its lonesome rhythm, turning slow under the uneasy sky. Clara woke to a sound that didn't belong. A soft click, a metal latch settling back into place, a whisper of floorboard weight. Her breath caught. She slipped from under the quilt, feet touching the cool floor. Across the room, Lena stirred slightly, still tender from her fall but deep in sleep. Clara reached for the small lamp on the dresser, but something in her gut said no, let the darkness hide you. She crept into the hall just in time to see Elias stepping from the shadows below, revolver already drawn, his jaw set in a line sharp enough to cut. He didn't look startled to see her, only tense, focused. Stay back, he murmured, barely a breath. Then she heard it, 2 voices downstairs, low and too smooth to be strangers. Clara froze halfway down the stairs as the lamp in the parlor flickered to life. There he was. Deputy Cole Lane. Dust on his coat, hat pushed low, eyes glinting like something feral that had finally found its way into the barn. Beside him stood another man, broad-shouldered, nervous, clutching a rifle he didn't quite know how to hold. Lane smiled at the sight of her, a slow, poisonous curl of the lips. Well, he drawled, isn't this cozy? Elias descended the last few steps and leveled the revolver without trembling. That's far enough, Cole. Lane lifted a folded paper. Territorial warrant, he said. Signed off by the acting marshal at the fort. Says these Wynn girls are still property of Spring Hollow's debt office, and I'm here to reclaim them. Clara felt her stomach knot. That isn't true, she said. Elias has our contract, which I can nullify, Lane snapped, when mistreatment is suspected. Elias stepped between Lane and Clara. Judge at Fort Ridley will tear that lie apart, Lane snorted. You honestly think a judge is gonna side with you? A man, folks whisper, murdered his own wife. His eyes gleamed cruel. Or will he side with the deputy who keeps the peace? He moved, suddenly, grabbed Clara's arm, fingers biting hard enough, she gasped. Come along now, Lane said, tugging her toward the door. You and your sister are coming back with me. Should have done this the first day. Let her go. Elias's voice was flat, deadly. Lane didn't. Halfway up the stairs, Lena appeared nightdress, hanging crooked cane in hand. Clara Lane jerked Clara harder. You've been playing house long enough. Lena tried to hurry down the cane, slipping on the step. She stumbled, missed her footing. Clara cried. The girl tumbled 2 steps before catching herself with a cry of pain. Everything exploded at once. Elias surged forward, slamming into Lane with the force of a charging bull. The men crashed into a table, knocking the lamp over. The hired man swore and stepped back, unsure whether to help or run. Clara scrambled to Lena, pulling her close while the fight rolled toward the open door. Fists, boots, dust, guttural breathing. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Lane broke free long enough to swing the butt of his revolver across Elias's shoulder. Elias grunted, staggered, then grabbed Lane by the coat and drove him into the yard. You think you can stop me? Lane spat, scrambling for his gun. I've been running this town since before you crawled here begging for land. His voice twisted into something darker, slick with triumph. Your old man should have paid what he owed, girl, he hissed toward Clara. Her blood chilled. Lane's mouth curled. House wouldn't have burned so fast if I hadn't soaked the back wall in kerosene that afternoon. Clara froze. The world froze. Even Elias stopped breathing. You, her voice came out broken. You burned our home, Lane laughed, short, vicious. Should have burned you with it, would have saved me trouble. The hired man paled. I didn't sign up for arson, Cole, he stammered, stepping back. Jesus, you said it was an accident. You shut your mouth, Lane snarled. But in that split-second distraction, Elias lunged. The gun went off. A burst of muzzle fire split the night. Elias jerked back, blood blooming across his shirt, where the bullet grazed his shoulder. Clara screamed. Lane raised the gun again, eyes wild. A second gunshot exploded overhead. Rufus stood at the barn's corner, shotgun raised to the sky. His old voice boomed across the yard. That's enough. The hired man threw his rifle to the dirt and backed away, hands shaking. I'm done. I ain't dying for this fool. He ran into the dark, disappearing into the storm-lit night. Lane, panting, bleeding, desperate, scrambled on the ground for his revolver. But then came hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. Clara whipped around just as 3 riders burst through the gate. Doc Harlan in front. 2 cavalrymen behind him, rifles ready, faces grim. Doc slid off his horse before it stopped moving. Lane, he barked, drop the gun. Lane hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Too many witnesses, too much truth already spilled. The cavalrymen aimed steady, and Deputy Cole Lane, whose badge had ruled Spring Hollow with fear, slowly let the revolver fall from his hand. It hit the dirt with a dull, final thud. And for the first time since the fire, Clara felt the ground shift beneath her, not with danger, but with the weight of something long hidden, finally dragged into the light. But the night was far from over. Elias staggered, blood seeping through his shirt, breath hitching, and Clara, heart pounding, realized the storm outside wasn't the only one threatening to take something from her. Spring Hollow woke that morning with a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with weather. Word traveled faster than stagecoaches in a small town, and by sunrise, the entire community knew Deputy Cole Lane had been brought in under guard by 1 doctor, 2 cavalrymen, and a rancher he'd long thought beneath him. Clara rode into town in the back of Doc Harlan's wagon with Lena and Rufus. Elias stayed behind at Broken Mesa to rest, his shoulder wrapped tight, his skin pale, but his eyes steady. Clara hated leaving him there, but she knew what needed saying could only be said by witnesses. The chapel and the courthouse shared a single building, a plain, wooden structure that leaned a little to the east, as though listening for trouble. By the time they arrived, half the town was already packed inside. The pews overflowed. Townsfolk lined the walls, hats in hand, murmuring. On the front bench sat Lane, hands bound, face bruised, badge missing. Without that little piece of tin on his chest, he looked smaller, less like a man of the law and more like what he truly was, a bully caught without his weapon. The marshal from the fort stood guard. Proceed, he said. Doc Harlan went first. His voice carried through the room, calm and clear. "I witnessed the deputy break into Mercer's home," he said. "Saw him with firearm drawn, threatening the Wynn girls. Heard him confess to setting their homestead aflame." A ripple ran through the crowd, shock, shame, disbelief, all tangled. Rufus took the stand next. He removed his hat, held it against his chest. "I've been working ranches 30 years, he said. "Seen men get pressured, seen men bullied. Elias Mercer ain't guilty of nothing but carrying his grief too quiet. And Lane," his voice roughened, "Lane forced his way into that house, tried to drag those girls out. I heard the confession myself. Then came the hired man. He trembled when he walked. His eyes darted everywhere except at Lane. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Didn't know he burned their place. I thought it was a debt job, that's all." When he said what he said, he swallowed hard. "I couldn't stand with him anymore." Gasps filled the room. Women covered their mouths. A few men set their jaws tight, as if deciding whether shame or anger weighed more. Then a voice rose from the left pew. Marla Briggs stood back straight, chin lifted. "I remember his visits to the Wynn homestead," she said. "More than once. Always late in the day. Always loud, always threatening Henry Wynn about debts that didn't add up." She looked straight at Lane. "You scared him, Cole. You scared that family into the ground." Lane snarled something under his breath, but the marshal silenced him with a single glare. The room hummed with shifting sentiment. A woman whispered, "We were wrong about those girls." Another murmured, "Wrong about Mercer too." A storekeeper nodded. "Always thought something off about Lane. Didn't want to believe it." The judge, a stiff-backed territorial officer who'd come from the fort, stood near the altar. "Deputy Cole Lane," he said sharply, "you're hereby stripped of badge and authority. You'll be transferred under guard to Fort Ridley until you can be transported to the territorial court." Lane's face twisted with hatred, but underneath that, Clara saw it, fear. Real fear, the kind that comes when a man realizes the world finally sees him for who he is. As soldiers let him out, the townsfolk parted without a word. Even those who once admired him wouldn't meet his eyes. Clara felt Lena's hand curl around hers. "We're free of him," Lena whispered. But Clara didn't answer, because she wasn't sure freedom was a moment. Sometimes it was a process, a slow walking away from ash. Back at Broken Mesa, the sun hung low, warm and copper-colored, casting long shadows over the barn. Elias sat at the kitchen table, sleeve rolled up, his bandage freshened. He looked better, still pale but alert. When Clara and Lena entered, he straightened with a soft sigh of relief. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "It's done. Lane's finished." Lena stepped forward. "They people in town finally believe us." "Believe you?" Elias laughed, once a rough sound. "I ain't ever cared much what Spring Hollow believes." "Maybe not," Clara said gently, "but the truth's out now." Something in his expression shifted, tired but lighter. Then he reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a folded packet of papers. Yellowed, creased, familiar. Clara froze. "Our contract," she whispered. Elias laid it carefully on the table. "I bought these," he said, voice steady, "to keep you out of men like Lane's hands, to give you time to breathe. Nothing more." He looked at Clara first, then Lena. "But I won't hold one more day over your heads that doesn't need to be there." Before either sister could speak, Elias tore the contract in half. The sound was soft paper parting, but it felt loud enough to echo off the mesa. He tore it again, then placed the pieces into the stove and struck a match. Flame caught quickly, curling the edges of the paper into blackened petals. Ash lifted, drifting upward as though finally free to rise. Lena covered her mouth with a hand. Tears welled in her eyes. Clara stood still, breath caught, unable to believe the weight leaving her shoulders. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't mercy disguised as control. It was a gift, with no strings attached. "You owe me nothing now," Elias said. "Not a day, not a dollar. The door's open whenever you choose to walk through it." Clara stared at him, at the rough lines in his face, at the quiet honesty in his voice, and for the first time since her world burned, she felt something loosen inside her, something breathe again, something unbound. But with freedom came its own questions, ones she wasn't ready to face just yet. And as the last ashes floated up the chimney, the truth settled in. They were no longer anyone's responsibility. Not held, not owned, not claimed. Which meant whatever they chose next would be their choice alone. Weeks passed as though the land itself were exhaling after a long-held breath. Lane was gone, taken north to a territorial holding cell, and Spring Hollow slowly settled back into its rhythms. Dust still drifted over the main road. The windmill still ticked its lonely song, but something in the air had softened, something in the people too. For the first time since the fire, Clara and Lena walked through town without eyes narrowing at them. No whispers behind gloved hands, no judgment, only nods, small, respectful, almost apologetic. Even Marla Briggs began saving a little extra flour for them at the store, sliding it across the counter with a wink instead of pity. Broken Mesa Ranch found a new beat in those weeks, a steadier one. Lena walked a little stronger on her cane, leaning less on the table edges, learning to manage her balance again. Some days she rode with Doc Harlan to the clinic, helping wrap bandages, prepare tinctures, soothe frightened children with her soft voice and gentle patience. Clara watched her sister bloom slowly like wildflowers after a long drought. As for Clara, she discovered her own place, almost by accident. One Sunday afternoon, Rufus asked if she might help one of the ranch hand's boys with his reading. By evening, 3 children crowded the kitchen table, tracing letters with dusty fingers while the stove warmed their backs. Soon it became routine, Sundays full of chalk-creased storybooks and the sound of children stumbling through their first sentences. Elias would sometimes linger in the doorway, arms folded, eyes warm in a way that made Clara's breath catch. He never interrupted, just watched as if afraid the slightest word might frighten the peace away. The ranch shifted around them, still rough, still lonely in places, but no longer hollow. It felt lived in again, it felt shared, and Clara felt safe, in a way she'd forgotten was possible. One evening, as the heat of the day faded, Elias saddled 2 horses without saying much. "Ride?" he asked. Clara nodded. The 2 of them climbed the trail behind the barn, the horses picking their way up the rise. The air smelled of juniper and dust, the wind cooler than it had been in months. They reached the ridge just as the sun dipped low gold, spilling across the mesas, turning the world into one long glowing memory. They stopped there side by side, letting their horses rest. Below them, Broken Mesa lay quiet and familiar, the barn roof catching the last light, the windmill spinning slow, Rufus leading a mare toward the corral gate. Clara felt the scene settle into her bones, felt it become part of her. Elias rested his hands on the saddle horn, staring at the horizon. "Town's talkin' different these days," he said. "Feels strange. Folks noddin', folks apologizin' in their own twisted ways." His voice softened. "They looked at you and Lena today like they finally saw the truth." Clara smiled faintly. "People are slow to notice what's right in front of them." "Some people," he murmured, giving her a sidelong glance, "see clearer than most." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was warm, settled like a blanket pulled around 2 people who'd lived through the same storm. "Clara," Elias said at last, voice dipping low, rough with meaning, "I never thanked you." She blinked. "For what?" "For believing me," he said. "Before the judge did. Before the town did. Before I believed there was any reason to tell the truth again." Clara swallowed, fingers tightening around the reins. "You didn't owe the town anything. Or me. You spoke because it was time." He breathed a small laugh. "Maybe so. But it was your eyes that made it possible." They fell quiet again, watching the sun sink behind the broken edge of the mesa. Coyotes called somewhere far off, light and sharp. After a long while, Elias spoke again, but this time his voice carried something deeper, something careful. "You're free now, Clara," he said. "Truly free." He looked down at his gloves, turning one slowly between his fingers. "You could go east if you wanted. Could start over in a new town. Could marry some shopkeeper, live somewhere with polished streets and church bells. You're not tied to this place. Or to me." The words hit Clara in a way she hadn't prepared for. She looked out over the ranch, the barn roof he'd repaired himself, the kitchen where she taught children to read, the small room down the hall that once held a little girl he still missed with every breath. All of it, woven with her days now, her memories. "This is the first place that didn't just keep us, Elias," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. It's the first place that asked what we wanted. His breath caught. Clara turned toward him fully. I don't want to leave. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying her words into the falling night. She took a breath, steadying herself. I care for you, she said, quiet but certain. Not because you saved us. Not because of what we owe. But because I've seen who you are when you think no one's watching. Elias went very still. Clara pushed on hard, tugging hard at her ribs. I've seen the way you look after this land. The way you speak to Lena when she's scared. The way you carry your grief without letting it turn you mean. I know you, Elias Mercer. He didn't speak. Not yet. But the way he looked at her eyes, soft, stunned, maybe even grateful, felt like the beginning of a door opening that neither of them had dared to touch before. Below them, the ranch lights flickered to life. Above them, the last edge of sunlight slid away. And Clara felt it, a new beginning settling over them like dusk. Fragile, hopeful, unfinished. Late autumn settled over Broken Mesa with a quiet kind of grace. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned a rich, warm gold, their leaves rustling like soft applause whenever the wind drifted through. Frost glazed the morning grass in thin white lace, crunching under boots at dawn. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and cold earth, an early hint of winter's breath on the land. The house itself had changed too, not in any grand way, no expansions, no new furniture hauled in from town, just the small signs that life had begun to grow again in the spaces where silence once lived. Josie's old room, kept untouched for years, held a second bed now. Lena's. Clara had suggested it gently when Lena's limp made the walk to their shared room harder on certain nights. At first, Lena resisted. But one evening, she carried her sewing basket into the little room and set it on the dresser. The next morning, her folded dresses appeared on the shelves. By week's end, she'd placed a tiny embroidered square, one she'd stitched during long afternoons at the ranch, at the foot of the bed Josie once slept in. Not replacing, not erasing, just joining. The kitchen bore its own evidence of change. Extra mugs lined the shelf, different colors, mismatched patterns. Clara's tall blue mug beside Elias's chipped tin cup. Plates in pairs now instead of singles. A second apron hung near the stove. Rufus even started grumbling that the place was too clean for a proper ranch, though the twinkle in his eye betrayed him. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet knitting together of lives. And as the weeks cooled into the edge of winter, it became a rhythm, steady, unhurried. Mornings began with Elias pouring coffee into Clara's cup before she even reached for it. She'd slide the sugar bowl his way without asking. They worked through the ledgers in the evenings, Clara calculating feed costs, while Elias made notes about fencing repairs. Decisions small and large were made together. Where to plant the garden, come spring, whether to repair the porch, roof now, or wait for warmer weather, how many horses to take to auction. Not once did they speak of obligations, debts, or expectations. It was a life built slow, built right. In town, folks had changed too. They didn't glance away anymore, didn't whisper. At the blacksmith's one brisk afternoon, Marla Briggs handed Clara a wrapped parcel of dried apples and said with a chuckle, "Funny thing, for two girls once sold on the block, you sure walk around like you own your horizon." Clara didn't correct her, didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, she felt exactly that, unbound, unbowed, standing tall on ground that no one else could claim. That night the sky cleared, crisp and wide. Stars pricked the dark like tiny watchfires scattered across eternity. Lena settled into the rocking chair on the porch, a quilt over her knees, the faint rhythm of her stitching finally giving way to sleep. The cane leaned beside her, catching a bit of moonlight. Clara and Elias stood at the porch rail, side by side. The breeze was gentle, cool enough to lift the loose strands of Clara's hair, warm enough to keep the night peaceful. For a long time they didn't speak. The kind of silence that felt full, not empty. Elias finally broke it, eyes still on the horizon. "That day in Spring Hollow," he murmured, "I said I'd give you both a home." Clara turned slightly toward him, her hands resting on the wooden rail. "But truth is," Elias continued, voice low and steady, "you brought one here with you. I just had the roof." The words settled over her like the softest blanket, unexpected and wholly true. Clara reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around something familiar, something worn with years of worry and memory. She pulled out the blue ribbon, Lena's ribbon once nearly burned, once so frayed, Clara thought it would fall apart, clean now, repaired in tiny stitches. She stepped forward and tied it gently around the porch post. The knot held firm, the ends fluttering in the night breeze. Then she spoke. "Then we'll leave it right here," she said. "So, no one forgets where we came from, or that we're staying because we chose to, not because anyone bought us." Elias looked at the ribbon, then at her, something warm unfolding behind his eyes. Not sudden love, not promised vows, something slower, steadier. Something that had been growing all along, like roots taking hold beneath the dry earth. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods. A lone horse grazed in the near pasture, its shape outlined silver under the moon. Lena rocked gently behind them, safe, warm, dreaming. And Clara stood beside Elias, the ribbon fluttering like a quiet banner of freedom. They had been sold once. But here on this porch of a ranch, held together by sorrow, courage, and choice, they were never owned. Not by papers, not by debt, not by fate. Just home, found, kept, chosen. And under the vast western sky, that was enough. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, on a dusty road, in a stranger's kindness, or in the quiet space between two wounded hearts, learning how to trust again. Clara, Lena, and Elias weren't looking for salvation. They were just trying to survive the ruins life had left them. Yet somehow, in all that brokenness, they found the pieces that fit. This story reminds us that a home isn't walls or land or the papers someone signs. It's the place where your fears stop chasing you, where your name is spoken gently, where your past doesn't define your worth. And maybe the most tender truth of all is this: even people who carry grief like a shadow can still offer shelter to others. Sometimes, by opening that door hesitantly, imperfectly, they find their own way back into the light. If you've ever felt lost or unwanted or held down by what life took from you, I hope this story whispers to you that second chances are real, and that love, quiet, patient, unforced, can grow even in the harshest soil. Thank you for being here with us. Truly, your time, your heart, your presence in this little corner of the world mean more than words can carry. Stories like this live on because of people like you. People who believe in compassion, in second chances, in the quiet courage of ordinary souls trying to find their way home. Every like, every share, every subscribe isn't just support for the channel. It's a way of carrying these stories farther, letting them reach someone who might need a little hope today. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for walking this journey with us. And if this story touched you even a little, we'd be honored if you helped us pass it on.